These are the 18 most manipulative figures in the lore of Runeterra, and every one of them understood a simple truth that most people never learn, which is that the surest way to control another person is to leave them convinced the choice was theirs alone. Some of them work with quiet words, some with illusions, some with the slow, patient pressure of centuries. And yet they all share the same cold habit, the willingness to shape a life from the shadows, while the victim believes they were free the whole time. This is a slow journey through the minds of Runeterra's greatest deceivers, the ones who rule not with strength, but with suggestion. We will move from the marble halls of Noxus, where old families guard even older secrets, out across the frozen Freljord where a single lie has held for thousands of years, down into the drowned temples of the Shadow Isles, and at last up past the mountain of Targon into the cold dark between the stars, where even a god can be tricked. Settle in, and let the stories unfold at their own unhurried pace. Because manipulation is a patient art, and these are the ones who mastered it. Also, if you haven't already, subscribe. I know it's a drag, but it means the world to me, and it helps me to keep this channel going. Anyway, we begin where nearly all of Runeterra's finest lies begin, in Noxus, and with a woman whose very name is a question no one has ever answered. LeBlanc, there is no reliable way to describe her, and that is the first thing worth understanding about her. Because the confusion is not an accident, it is the design. She is the matron of the Black Rose, a secret society that has threaded itself through the empire of Noxus for longer than most of its rulers have been alive. To the public, she is a noblewoman of pale beauty and perfect composure. To the few who glimpse what she truly is, she is something far older and far less human. A mistress of illusion who can split herself into copies, walk out of a mirror, and leave a room without ever having entered it. The name itself is part of the trap. LeBlanc may be a single ancient sorceress who has renewed her own life again and again across the centuries, or the name may be a title worn by a line of women who each inherit the same face, the same power, and the same buried purpose. She has allowed both stories to spread, and she has never corrected either, because a person you cannot name is a person you cannot fight. When you do not know whether you are speaking to the real LeBlanc or one of her reflections, you have already lost, and you lost the moment you assumed there was a difference. Her true gift is not the illusion of the body, but the illusion of trust. The Black Rose does not rule Noxus from a throne, it rules from beside the throne, whispering into the ears of the powerful and letting them believe the whispers were their own thoughts all along. For generations, the Order held quiet influence over the Noxian court, steering wars, marriages, and successions. And its hand was never seen because it never needed to be. LeBlanc understood that a ruler who trusts you will do more for your cause than a ruler you threaten, and so she made herself indispensable. A voice of counsel, a keeper of secrets, a friend to the frightened and the ambitious alike. Consider what she did with the old ruler of Noxus, the Grand General who sat the throne before the Empire's more recent turmoil. To the Empire, he appeared to reign in full command of his faculties, a strong hand guiding a hungry nation. Behind that image, the Black Rose had wound itself so completely around him that it grew difficult to say where the man ended and the Order's influence began. His strength was a mask painted by LeBlanc, and the nation obeyed a puppet without ever suspecting the strings, which is exactly the kind of arrangement she prefers. The lie so total that no one thinks to look for it. She has also shaped individual lives with the same patience she brings to nations. She has taken the young and the gifted, the ones burning with ambition and short on wisdom, and she has offered them exactly what they craved: power, knowledge, a place in something vast and hidden. What she never mentions is the price. or the fact that the gift was always a leash. Those she cultivates come to believe they are her equals, her partners, her chosen, and they discover far too late that they were only ever pieces on a board she had finished arranging before they were born. What makes her the most complete manipulator in all of Runeterra is that she has no visible ambition to expose her. A tyrant wants a crown, a general wants a war, and you can see those hungers coming. LeBlanc wants only to keep the game running, to remain the unseen center of every scheme, and a person who wants nothing you can name is a person you can never satisfy, never bribe, and never catch. She has outlasted the rulers who trusted her, and the rivals who hunted her, and she has done it all while smiling. Because to her, the deception is not a means to an end. The deception is the pleasure itself. There is a particular sort of victim she prizes above all others, the clever one who believes themselves far too sharp to ever be fooled. A trusting fool is easy prey and offers little sport, but a suspicious and capable mind, once turned, becomes a much finer instrument. Because it will defend the lie it has swallowed with all the cunning it once used to doubt. LeBlanc seeks out exactly these people, flatters their intelligence, and lets them arrive at her conclusions as though the conclusions had been theirs all along, so that by the time they belong to her, she has done more than deceive them. She has recruited their own sharpness into the work of deceiving themselves. That is the quiet brilliance of the Black Rose, an order that has never needed many hands because it prefers to borrow the hands and the minds of the very people who might otherwise have stood against it. And yet even the Queen of Secrets could not keep every secret forever. Because there rose against her in Noxus a man who collected lies the way she wove them, a strategist who understood that knowledge is the only weapon a schemer cannot dodge. Swain, Jericho Swain, is the Grand General of Noxus, and his story is the story of a man who lost almost everything, and then rebuilt himself into the one force the Black Rose could not fully control. Once a soldier, he was crippled in body, missing an arm, cast out and broken, the kind of man an empire like Noxus discards without a second thought. What the Empire failed to notice was that a man with nothing left to lose, and a mind that never stops working, is the most dangerous creature it can produce. His rise came through a bargain that most men would never dare to make. In his lowest hour, he reached out to a demon named Raum, and where a weaker person would have been consumed, Swain struck a deal, trading a portion of himself for power and for something he valued even more than power, which was sight. The demon's gift lets him pull secrets out of the world the way a fisherman pulls fish from the sea, dragging hidden truths into the light and feeding on the strength of those truths. His ruined arm became a thing of shadow and ravens, and his hunger for information became the engine of an empire's transformation. Where LeBlanc manipulates by hiding the truth, Swain manipulates by owning it. He does not need to lie to you when he already knows the lie you are about to tell, already knows the fear you are trying to conceal, already knows the alliance you believe is secret. He collects secrets the way a miser collects coins, and he spends them at the precise moment they will do the most damage. To sit across a table from Swain is to feel that the man has read the last page of the story before you have finished the first, and the worst part is that he usually has. His long campaign against the Black Rose is one of the great quiet wars of Noxian history. For years the Order believed it moved unseen, and for years Swain let it believe that, gathering names, mapping connections, waiting, he understood that you do not strike a hidden enemy the moment you find it. You strike it only when you have found all of it. And he was willing to spend a lifetime finding all of it. When he finally reshaped the leadership of Noxus, replacing the old singular rule with a ruling structure of 3, so that no single person could ever again be quietly puppeted the way the old Grand General had been, It was a move aimed straight at the heart of everything LeBlanc had built. He did not just take power. He redesigned power so that her favorite trick would no longer work. The unsettling truth about Swain is that his manipulations often serve a genuine vision. He does not scheme purely for pleasure. He schemes because he believes Noxus can be greater than the corrupt and superstitious thing it had become, and he is willing to deceive, sacrifice, and maneuver anyone who stands between the Empire and that future. This makes him harder to hate and far harder to stop, because a manipulator who believes he is right will never talk himself out of the plan. He has already decided that the ends are worth it, and he decided long before you ever met him. His ravens are more than a demon's ornament, they are his eyes across the whole Empire, carrying back the whispers of 1,000 rooms he never enters, and Swain sifts through that endless flood of overheard truth, the way a jeweler sifts gravel for a single stone. He has made himself the man who knows, and in a nation built on ambition and betrayal, the man who knows is the man who rules. Because every schemer in Noxus must eventually wonder whether their secret is already sitting somewhere in his ledger. He rarely bothers to threaten anyone directly, since the simple possibility that he has already seen through them does the threatening on his behalf. And a rival who cannot be sure how much Swain knows will falter at exactly the moments when faltering proves fatal. Many of his battles are decided before they are ever fought, won quietly in the dread he plants in the minds of people who have never once spoken to him. From the shadowed politics of Noxus, we travel far to the north, past the last warm hearths and out onto the endless ice, where the oldest lie in all of Runeterra has been kept alive for thousands of years by a single unblinking will. Lysandra the Freljord tells many stories about its own beginnings, about the 3 great sisters who once led its people, and almost all of those stories are wrong, because the one who survived to tell them made certain of it. Long ago there were 3 sisters, Avarosa, Cyrilda, and Lysandra, and from them the tribes of the frozen north trace their oldest legends. 2 of those sisters are remembered as heroes and martyrs. The third arranged their deaths, buried the truth beneath the snow, and has spent every century since guarding the lie with a patience that no mortal enemy could ever match. Beneath the ice of the Freljord there dwell things called the Watchers, ancient and hungry beings from the cold, dark places of the world, and long ago they threatened to swallow everything living. The 3 sisters stood against them, or so the sisters believed, until Lysandra made a private choice, rather than die fighting an enemy she could not defeat. She went to the Watchers and struck a bargain of her own, and in doing so she turned against the very sisters who trusted her at her side. The war that followed did not end cleanly. The Watchers were frozen in place, sealed beneath the ice by the power Lysandra had gained, and yet the sealing bound her to them as much as it imprisoned them, and it granted her a life that has stretched across untold generations. For all the ages since, Lysandra has walked the Freljord wearing different faces and different names, and her single unbroken task has been to keep the world from remembering what actually happened. She founded the order that guards the deepest ice, and through it she controls the story that the tribes tell about themselves. She decides which heroes are praised and which are forgotten, which threats are believed and which are dismissed as legend. An entire people's understanding of their own past has been quietly authored by the one person who most needs that past to stay hidden, and they have no idea. Because the forgery has held for so long that it has simply become the truth. Her manipulation is the deepest kind there is, because it does not target a single ruler or a single court, it targets memory itself. When you lie to a king, the king may one day learn better. When you rewrite the history of an entire land across thousands of years, there is eventually no one left alive who remembers the world before your lie. And at that point, the lie no longer needs defending. It defends itself. Every child of the Freljord who grows up believing the comfortable version of the old war becomes, without ever choosing to, another guardian of Lysandra's secret. She has turned a whole civilization into unwitting keepers of the very deception that binds them. What makes her story quietly tragic and quietly terrifying is that she may believe she is the hero of it. In her own telling, the bargain she made saved the Freljord from a doom the others were too proud to survive, and the endless deception since has been the price of that survival. She carries the weight of a truth so dangerous that she has decided no one else can be trusted to hold it, and so she holds it alone, forever, freezing the past in place the same way the Watchers themselves were frozen. Whether that makes her a savior or a monster depends entirely on which story you believe, and the only person who knows for certain has spent an age making sure you will never hear it. To keep a lie alive across an entire age requires far more than a single act of deception. It requires an institution, and so Lysandra built one, an order sworn to guard the deepest ice and, without ever quite grasping the whole of it, to guard her secret along with it. Generation after generation of the faithful have tended the buried truth, believing they serve a noble and ancient duty, never once suspecting that the duty itself is the deception, that the thing they so carefully protect is the very thing that should have been dragged into the light. She has turned devotion into a lock and loyalty into a key that fits only her own hand, and the cruelest stroke of all is that her keepers are good people, faithful and brave, spending their whole lives to defend a lie they would be horrified to understand. A manipulation that can bend genuine virtue into serving its own ends is a manipulation that no honest heart can easily break, because the honest heart never thinks to look for it. From the frozen north we return to the warm and treacherous heart of Noxus, to a great family of the Empire whose ambitions ran so deep that one of its daughters was willing to trade her own humanity for a share of hidden power. Cassiopeia. She was born Cassiopeia de Coteau, a daughter of one of the most powerful military families in all of Noxus, sister to the famous assassin Katerina, raised in a household where influence was the family trade and where cunning was valued far above kindness. From the beginning, she was the clever one, the beautiful one, the child who understood people the way her sister understood knives. She learned early that charm is a tool and that a warm smile can open doors that force never could. And she spent her youth practicing the gentle art of getting others to want what she wanted them to want. Her hunger, though, ran deeper than the ordinary schemes of Noxian nobility. She wanted something more than status, and more than a good marriage. She wanted true power, the kind that does not fade when the political winds change, and that hunger led her far from home into the ancient ruins of the southern desert, into a tomb that should have stayed sealed. Whatever she was searching for in that buried place, she found something else instead, an old guardian of terrible power, and the encounter did not leave her as it found her. She went into the tomb a beautiful woman with dangerous ambitions, and she came out a serpentine creature, her lower body coiled and scaled, her gaze able to turn the living to stone. Most people, robbed of their beauty and twisted into a monster, would call it a curse. Cassiopeia refused to. She took the transformation and folded it into her method, because she had always manipulated through allure, and now she simply had new tools for it. A hypnotic presence, a venom in her every gesture, the ability to freeze an enemy in place with nothing more than a look. What she lost in ordinary human charm, she replaced with something harder to resist, the fascination of the dangerous and the strange, and she learned to wield her new form the way she had once wielded her smile. Her manipulation works because she never lets anyone see the calculation behind it. She presents herself as wounded, as sympathetic, as a woman betrayed by fate and deserving of pity. And she uses that pity to draw people close before they realize how little of it she actually feels. She plays the victim and the seductress at once, and the two masks together make her nearly impossible to read. By the time an ally understands that Cassiopeia has been steering them toward her own ends, they are already too deep in her coils to pull free. Held there as surely as if they had already been turned to stone. What raises her above a simple schemer is the sheer patience of her ambition. She lost her human form, her place in polite society, and the future she had planned for herself, and rather than break, she recalculated. She treats her monstrous nature as an investment that will one day pay out in power greater than anything she could have gained as a mere noblewoman, and she is content to wait, to charm, and to poison her way toward it for as long as it takes. A person who can turn even the destruction of their own body into a strategy is not someone you outlast. She has already made peace with losing everything once, which means she has nothing left that you can threaten her with. She has never stopped wielding the one asset her transformation could not strip from her, which is the great name of her family and the tangle of debts, rivalries, and obligations that comes bound to it. Where her sister Katerina prefers the honesty of a blade drawn straight across the throat, Cassiopeia favors the slower and subtler work of favors owed and grudges nursed, content to let her enemies see a ruined creature deserving of pity while she quietly arranges the pieces around them. She plays weakness the way others play strength, inviting the powerful to underestimate the poor cursed woman coiled in the shadows of a noble house, and that very underestimation is the venom she means them to drink. By the time anyone recognizes that the pitiable serpent has been steering the fortunes of the mighty toward her own hidden ends, they are already tangled in a design she began weaving the instant she decided her curse would serve as a ladder rather than a grave. The Dukuto name carries weight in Noxus, but there is another figure in the Empire's shadows whose influence predates that family and nearly every other. A man who has been charming the powerful and draining them dry since before most Noxian bloodlines began. Vladimir. He appears at the great gatherings of Noxian society as a striking and elegant patron of the arts, a man of refined taste and endless generosity, the sort of host whose invitations the ambitious compete to receive. What none of his admiring guests understand is that they are being courted by one of the oldest living things in the entire empire, a practitioner of blood magic who has kept himself young and beautiful for so many centuries that the world he was born into no longer exists in any book. Everyone at his gatherings believes they are the one using the connection to climb. Vladimir knows better, because he has watched 100 generations of the ambitious climb his stairs and never once climb back down as the same people. His power is hemomancy, the sorcery of blood, and it is the source of both his agelessness and his hold over others. He can sense the blood of those around him, read the truth of their bodies, and reach into them in ways they cannot feel until it is far too late. But the truly frightening thing about Vladimir is not the magic, it is the social patience the magic has brought him. When you have lived across ages, a single human lifetime looks like an afternoon, and a young noble's grand ambitions look like the games of a child. He courts the powerful not with any urgency, but with the calm certainty of a man who knows he will still be standing long after they and their heirs have turned to dust. He offers patronage, protection, and belonging, and he offers them so warmly that his chosen never notice how the relationship slowly inverts. At first they believe Vladimir needs them, their youth, their position, their fresh connections to a changing empire. In time they come to need him, his approval, his favor. the intoxicating sense of being near something ancient and magnificent. And by then the blood pact is sealed in every way that matters. He does not enslave people with chains. He enslaves them with the feeling of being chosen, and it works precisely because it feels like the opposite of manipulation, like friendship, like fortune, like being finally seen. His deepest game runs beneath even the surface of Noxian politics, tangled up with the same hidden orders that have shaped the Empire from the shadows for generations. He is a survivor of an older and darker Noxus, a keeper of practices most of the Empire has forgotten it ever knew, and he moves through the modern nation like a man reading a book he has already finished. Rulers rise and fall around him, factions war and vanish. And Vladimir simply hosts another gathering, pours another glass, and adds another eager young noble to the long, quiet ledger of lives he has slowly made his own. The horror of Vladimir is how pleasant he makes the whole thing feel. He never needs to frighten anyone, because fear puts people on guard, and a guarded person is harder to bleed. Instead, he flatters, he indulges, he welcomes, and he lets the beauty of his own endless youth do the persuading. By the time his guests understand what he is, they have usually stopped wanting to escape him at all, which is the final and most complete kind of control. The kind where the prisoner has fallen in love with the cell. Time is the weapon no rival can ever match him at, and Vladimir wields it with the ease of a man who has never once felt rushed. A young noble schemes across a handful of years, an ambitious general across a few decades, but Vladimir schemes across centuries, and set against an opponent who thinks in centuries, the ordinary players of Noxian politics are simply children who tire and die long before the game is finished. He befriends a family, cultivates its heirs, and absorbs its secrets. And when that family finally fades, he does not mourn it, he merely turns to the next, having learned long ago that every dynasty is temporary except his own. The powerful come to him hungry for the glamour of his endless youth, eager to stand near something that does not decay, and not one of them ever grasps that in reaching for his permanence, they are quietly handing over their own. One warm and willing generation at a time. We have walked so far among the schemers of the mortal world, the nobles and generals and immortals who wear human faces, that it is easy to forget Runeterra holds far older predators, beings who were never human at all, and who feed on the very emotions the manipulators of Noxus merely exploit. To meet the first of them, we must leave the halls of power entirely and follow a lonely traveller down a road at dusk, drawn onward by the loveliest promise they have ever been offered. Evelyn, she is a demon, one of the oldest and most patient cruelties in the world, and she does not want your gold, or your throne, or your secrets. She wants your agony, and she has learned that the surest path to it runs straight through your desire. Evelyn does not hunt with fangs and terror, at least not at first. She hunts with beauty, with the exact shape of the thing her victim has always wanted and never dared to hope for, and she lets that longing do the work of leading the prey to her. Her method is a slow and deliberate seduction. She appears as an alluring figure, radiant and inviting, and she reads the hidden wants of whoever crosses her path so precisely that they feel, for the first time in their lives, truly understood. She offers intimacy, connection, the promise of a pleasure beyond anything the mortal world can give, and because the promise is tailored so perfectly to the person hearing it. They follow her willingly, gratefully, hungrily. No one has to be dragged to Evelyn. That is the point of her. Her victims chase her, thanking their luck the whole way, right up until the moment the mask comes off. And when it comes off, the beauty gives way to a nightmare of lashing tendrils and predatory hunger, and the pleasure she promised turns into a torment so exquisite and so prolonged that she can feed on it for as long as the body holds out. She savors suffering the way a connoisseur savors a rare vintage, and she has had ages to refine her palate. The betrayal is not incidental to the horror, it is the finest part of it, because the sweetest agony to a demon like Evelyn is the despair of someone who realizes that the wonderful thing they wanted was the very thing that destroyed them. What makes her a true manipulator rather than a simple monster is her intelligence about human longing. She understands that every person carries a private hunger they are ashamed of, a want they hide even from themselves, and she has made an art of finding that hidden thing and wearing its shape. She does not tempt people with what they say they want, she tempts them with what they secretly want. And that is a far more powerful hook. The lonely find warmth in her, the proud find admiration, the desperate find hope, and each of them mistakes her reflection of their own desire for something real reaching back toward them. There is a terrible honesty buried inside Evelyn's deceptions, which is that she never actually promises anything she does not deliver. She promises an experience beyond imagining, and her victims certainly get one. She simply lets them fill in the rest with their own wishful thinking, and she has learned that people will lie to themselves far more sweetly than she ever could. The most efficient manipulation is the one where the target does most of the work, and Evelyn has spent an eternity perfecting exactly that. The art of standing perfectly still and letting desire drag her dinner to her door. There is a cold cleverness in the way she chooses her shape for each new victim, because the form that would draw one person in would send another fleeing, and Evelyn never simply guesses. She watches, she listens, she reads the small, unguarded signs of a longing someone believes they have hidden even from themselves, and only then does she decide what to become. To the lonely she is warmth, to the proud she is a conquest worth the chase, to the guilty she is forgiveness, and each of them is certain that the wondrous thing before them has come for them, and them alone. When in truth, it has come only for its own hunger and merely dressed itself in the shape of their private wish. That tailoring is what makes the eventual horror so complete. Because the victim did not stumble into a trap set for anyone at all, they walked willingly into one built precisely to their own measure, and some part of them understands, in the final moments, that the thing unmaking them knew them more truly than anyone who ever claimed to love them. Where Evelyn offers pleasure and delivers torment, our next deceiver offers refuge and delivers something worse, luring the lost not into a bedchamber but into a temple, and not for her own hunger alone, but to feed a god of many legs that waits in the dark for the meals she brings it. Elise, long ago she was a mortal woman of Noxian blood, born Elise Kithira Zarvan, wed into fortune and comfort. The kind of person for whom the ordinary rewards of a good marriage should have been more than enough. They were never enough for her. She wanted to hold on to her youth and her beauty and her power over others forever. And she came to learn that there was a way to have exactly that, if only she was willing to pay for it in the lives of other people. She was willing, and she has been paying that price ever since, one victim at a time, for longer than any natural life could stretch. The source of her power is a monstrous spider god that dwells within a hidden temple, an ancient and hungry thing that offers her a simple arrangement. She brings it living offerings, and in return it grants her the youth, the beauty, and the terrible strength she craves. This is the whole of Elise's existence now, an endless hunt for people to feed into the dark, and she has become so good at it that her victims walk to their deaths, convinced they are the luckiest souls alive. That is her true art. Anyone can catch prey with a trap. Elise catches hers by making them grateful to be caught. She is charming beyond the ordinary meaning of the word, radiant and gracious and warm. and she uses that warmth like a lantern in the dark to draw the wandering toward her. She finds the ambitious, the desperate, the ones searching for a patron or a path upward, and she offers herself as the answer to every one of their prayers. She promises opportunity, protection, belonging, and she promises it so beautifully that the promise feels like fate finally turning kind. By the time her guests reach the temple and understand where the warmth was leading them, the doors have closed, and the many eyes in the darkness have already begun to gleam. Part of what makes her manipulation so effective is that she genuinely does elevate a chosen few, at least for a while. Not everyone who follows Elise is fed to the god at once. Some are kept, cultivated, made into loyal servants of her cult, given real favor and real power so that their example can lure others in behind them. She understands that the most persuasive advertisement for her generosity is a survivor who believes they were rewarded, and she is patient enough to grow a few of those on purpose. The satisfied follower singing her praises does more recruiting than any lie she could tell herself. Her ability to shift between the shape of an elegant woman and the shape of a great spider is the perfect image of everything she is. One form invites you closer, and the other consumes you. And the horror is that they are the same creature, the same smile stretched across two bodies. The warmth was never separate from the hunger. It was the hunger wearing its finest clothes, and every kindness she ever showed was a strand of the web being spun a little tighter around whoever was foolish enough to feel flattered by her attention. The deepest cruelty of Elise is how thoroughly she has made peace with what she does. She feels no torment over the lives she trades away, because she long ago decided that her own endless youth is worth any number of strangers, and a manipulator who has silenced her own conscience is far more dangerous than one still wrestling with it. She hunts without hesitation and lies without strain, and she does it all wearing the loveliest face in the room, which is exactly why the room never sees her coming. Around her she has gathered a devoted following, a cult that believes her promises of power and purpose and carries out much of her hunting on her behalf, and this may be the most efficient piece of her whole design. A lone predator can lure only so many, but a predator who persuades her prey to become recruiters multiplies her reach without ever leaving the temple. And Elise has spent lifetimes perfecting exactly that arrangement. Her followers bring her fresh offerings and fresh believers, every one of them certain they are ascending towards something greater, none of them ever pausing to count how few of their number climb back down. She has built a machine out of hope and ambition, a self-feeding engine of the willing, and she has only to remain gracious and beautiful at its center, while it delivers the hungry to her door in an unbroken procession that shows no sign of running dry. From the Spider's Temple we cross the water to the cursed and fog-bound Shadow Isles, where death did not end the schemes of the living, but freed them of every last restraint, and where one soul in particular turned an eternity of undeath into an endless opportunity for cruelty. Thresh. In life he was nothing much to look at, a lowly keeper and warden set to guard a great collection of knowledge and relics on the Blessed Isles, back when those isles were still blessed and not yet drowned in death. He was a small and envious man, bitter about his lowly station, resentful of everyone placed above him, and he nursed a private appetite for cruelty that his ordinary life gave him few chances to feed. He tormented those unfortunate enough to fall under his authority, and he was disciplined and diminished for it, which only deepened the resentment curled up inside him. He was, in short, exactly the kind of soul that the coming catastrophe would reward. When the great cataclysm known as the Ruination swept the Isles, a wave of death and dark magic that turned a paradise into a haunted ruin, most who were caught in it were unmade, their minds scattered into the endless mist. Thresh was not unmade. He seized the darkness rather than fleeing it, and where others lost themselves, he kept his memories, his intellect, and above all his malice, emerging from the catastrophe as a spectral warden with an eternity ahead of him and no rules left to obey. Death did not punish Thresh. Death set him free to become fully what he had always secretly been. Now he wanders the world collecting souls, and his weapon of choice is not a blade, but a lantern, a prison of green light into which he binds the spirits he claims. He does not simply kill. Killing would be a mercy, and Thresh has no interest in mercy. He prefers to break a person slowly, to study exactly what they love and what they fear, and to take his time dismantling them so that the despair he harvests is as rich and complete as possible. He is a patient torturer in an age that gave him unlimited time to practice, and he treats each new victim as a puzzle to be savored rather than a task to be finished. His manipulation is built on false hope, which he considers the finest ingredient in all suffering. He will offer a trapped or dying soul a bargain, a chance, a way out, and he will make the offer sound almost sincere, because he understands that despair is deepest when it follows hope. He lets his victims believe they might survive, might escape, might strike a deal, and he nurtures that belief carefully, right up until the moment he snatches it away. The cruelty is not in denying hope. The cruelty is in granting it first, and Thresh has an artist's patience for setting up that particular fall. What sets him apart from the mindless horrors of the Shadow Isles is that he chooses his cruelty deliberately and enjoys it consciously. The other things in the mist are driven by instinct and hunger, but Thresh is driven by something worse, a genuine delight in the ruin of others, a curiosity about how much a soul can bear before it breaks. He collects the most interesting spirits the way he once guarded the most precious relics, and he keeps them close, revisiting their pain across the centuries, the way a lesser man might revisit a favorite book. Nothing he does is careless. Every torment is designed. The most unsettling thing about Thresh is how reasonable he can seem while he works. He speaks calmly, offers his bargains politely, and carries himself with the dry patience of a clerk doing his job, and that composure is far more frightening than any snarling monster could be. He has all the time in the world and none of the mercy, and he has learned that the surest way to break a person is to be pleasant about it, to let them believe for just a moment that they are dealing with someone who might be persuaded, before he shows them, gently, that they never were. He is selective in a way the mindless dead can never be, choosing his victims for the quality of the despair they will yield rather than for anything he might gain from them, and this makes him closer to a collector than a common killer. A great and proud soul, one with much to lose and a long way to fall, is worth more to him than a dozen frightened peasants, because the depth of the ruin is the entire point, and Thresh will pass over easy prey without a second thought to pursue a harder and more satisfying one. He keeps his finest catches close within the cold green glow of his lantern, returning to them across the long years, drawing out their torment so slowly that a single soul can be made to last. And he does all of it with the unhurried care of a being who quite literally has forever. The other horrors of the Shadow Isles kill because it is simply their nature, but Thresh kills because he has cultivated a taste, and a taste, unlike a hunger, is never truly satisfied and only grows more particular the longer it is indulged. Not every manipulator in Runeterra deals in horror and eternity. Some of them work with a deck of cards, a warm grin, and a talent for making you feel like the luckiest person at the table, right up until you count your pockets and find them empty. Twisted Fate. His real name is Tobias Felix, and he is the most charming thief you will ever be robbed by. A wandering card master and con artist who has made his living off the simple fact that people trust a smiling man with a good story. He grew up among travelers on the road, learning early that the world is full of marks and that a clever tongue is worth more than any weapon. And he refined those lessons into a lifelong career of relieving the greedy and the gullible of their money. He is a swindler by trade and a showman by nature, and the two talents together have made him one of the most successful confidence men in all of Runeterra. His magic runs through a deck of enchanted cards, letting him strike at a distance and, more usefully, letting him vanish from one place and reappear somewhere else entirely, which is a remarkably convenient trick for a man whose plans so often require him to no longer be present when the truth comes out. But the cards are almost beside the point. Twisted Fate's real weapon has always been his manner, the easy warmth, the confident patter, the ability to make a stranger feel like an old friend within minutes. He wins at the table not because he cheats, though he certainly does, but because he makes his victims want to keep playing. The great con is the shape of his whole life. He studies people quickly and accurately, finds the thing they want, whether it is money, respect, excitement, or simply the feeling of being clever, and he offers them a version of it just real enough to keep them reaching. He lets them win small so they will risk big. He plays the fool so they will underestimate him. He builds trust deliberately and spends it precisely, and by the time the mark realizes the friendly stranger has taken everything, the friendly stranger is already 3 towns away, counting the winnings and looking for the next table. His most famous scheme, and the one that shaped much of his life, involved a partner named Malcolm Graves, a hard and dangerous man who ran jobs alongside him for years. A great heist between them went wrong, and Graves came to believe that Twisted Fate had betrayed him and left him to a terrible fate. And that belief turned a partner into a relentless hunter who spent years chasing him across the world with a grudge and a very large gun. The truth of what happened between them is more tangled than a simple betrayal. A matter of impossible choices and forced hands rather than pure treachery, but it hardly mattered, because the con man's whole life had taught Graves exactly one lesson about him, which is that Twisted Fate always has an angle. That is the quiet tragedy tucked inside all his charm. A man who manipulates everyone eventually finds that no one can fully trust him. Not even the few people he might actually care about, because the very skill that makes him so good at getting close is the skill that makes closeness impossible. Graves hunted him not only out of anger, but out of the wound of having believed in him, and Twisted Fate could never quite prove his innocence, because a lifetime of lies had made his word worthless. The great manipulator's punishment is a lonely one. When you have taught the whole world that your smile means a trick, you can never smile at anyone and be believed again. And yet, he keeps playing, keeps grinning, keeps dealing the cards, because it is the only life he knows, and because some part of him truly loves the game more than any prize it could win him. He does not con people only for the money. He cons them for the pleasure of the performance, the thrill of the moment when the mark still trusts him and the trap is already sprung, and in that he shares something with every other manipulator in this journey. A fascination with the act of deception that has long since outgrown any practical reason for it. The lie is no longer the means. For Twisted Fate, as for so many of them, the lie has quietly become the point. Watch him work a crowded room, and you will see a craftsman rather than a common crook. Because Twisted Fate reads a table of strangers the way a scholar reads a familiar book, marking the proud one who cannot bear to fold, the greedy one who will always chase a loss, the lonely one who wants nothing more than to be liked by the charming man dealing the cards. He gives each of them exactly what they need to keep sitting there, a compliment, a confidence, a small and thrilling little victory, and he does it so smoothly that the losing feels like fun right up until the pockets turn out empty. The money is almost secondary to the pleasure of being trusted by people who really ought to know better, and he gathers that trust the way another man gathers coins, spending it slowly, savoring the long moment just before the mark begins to understand. A lesser thief takes whatever he can and runs, but Twisted Fate lingers, because for him, the theft was never truly the point. The performance was, and an audience that applauds while being robbed is the finest applause a showman can hope to earn. We leave the gambler's table and travel east to Ionia, a land of balance and spirit, where one man turned murder into performance and learned that the most powerful thing you can control is not a person's body, but the horror in their imagination. Kader Jin does not think of himself as a killer. He thinks of himself as an artist, and he considers his murders to be masterpieces, each one composed, staged, and executed with the care of a painter approaching a canvas. This is the first and most important thing to understand about him, because his entire method flows from that single terrible belief. He does not kill to eliminate a target or to satisfy a rage. He kills to create an effect, to shape the emotions of everyone who will later stand horrified before his work. And in that sense, his true medium is not blood at all. His true medium is fear, and his audience is everyone who hears what he has done. For years, he practiced his craft in secret across Ionia, leaving behind scenes so elaborate and so disturbing that they seemed almost designed to be studied. Eventually, he was caught and locked away, and for a long stretch of time the land was free of him. What returned him to the world was not an escape, but a decision made by others, because a faction within Ionia's own ruling order chose to release him quietly and point him at their enemies. They believed they could use a monster as a tool, aim him like a weapon, and keep his artistry pointed in a useful direction. They were half right, and the half they were wrong about is the half that matters. Here the manipulation runs in both directions at once, which is what makes Jin so unusual among the deceivers of Runeterra. He was manipulated, used, released from his cage to serve someone else's schemes, and yet he in turn manipulates everyone around him, including the very people who think they are holding his leash. They believe they are the artists, and he is the brush. He knows better. To Jin, his handlers are simply part of the composition, patrons who have unknowingly commissioned his greatest works and who will one day become subjects of them, and he plays the obedient weapon precisely because obedience buys him the freedom to create. His performances are built around pattern and ritual, an obsession with a particular number that shapes how many shots he fires and how his scenes are arranged, and this compulsion is not weakness but signature. He wants his work to be recognized, to be known as his, to send a message that spreads outward from each killing like a ripple, teaching an entire population to feel a very specific dread. He understands crowds the way other manipulators understand individuals. He knows that terror shared among thousands takes on a life of its own, and that a single carefully staged horror, if it is theatrical enough, can hold a whole province in its grip long after the deed itself is done. That is his real manipulation, the shaping of mass emotion through spectacle. A tyrant controls people by threatening them directly, but Jin controls them by threatening no one in particular and everyone at once. By making the possibility of becoming his next canvas hang over an entire land like weather. He performs cruelty in a way designed to be witnessed, discussed, and feared, and every retelling of his work does his labor for him, spreading the dread further than any single killer's hands ever could. He has weaponized reputation itself, turning the stories people tell about him into an invisible extension of his reach. There is a cold intelligence beneath the theatrics that keeps him from being merely mad. He plans meticulously adapts cleverly, and hides his true intentions behind the role of the cooperative asset, and he never loses sight of the fact that his usefulness to his handlers is the only thing keeping him free. He gives them what they ask for, or appears to, while quietly composing toward his own ends, and he is content to be underestimated for as long as underestimation serves him. The most dangerous performer is the one the audience believes they are directing, and Jin has spent his freedom letting powerful people believe exactly that. His obsession with a single number runs through everything he does, shaping how many times he strikes and how each of his scenes is composed, and he treats this compulsion not as a flaw but as a signature, the mark that tells the world a work belongs to him. He craves recognition above nearly everything else, wanting the dread he creates to be understood as authored, because an anonymous horror is only a tragedy, while a signed one is a message. Every killing is arranged to be discovered, studied, and retold, and each retelling carries his dread a little further than his own hands ever could, until an entire province is performing his work for him merely by being afraid of it. That is the strange arithmetic of his art, a single staged horror multiplied by every frightened voice that repeats the story. And Jin grasped long ago that the surest way to terrorize thousands is to hand them something they cannot stop describing to one another. From the staged horrors of Ionia, we descend into a far older kind of deception, one buried inside ancient weapons that have waited across the ages for a desperate hand to lift them, whispering promises of strength to anyone weak enough to listen. Aatrox. Long before the modern nations of Runeterra rose, there existed a group of mighty beings born of an ancient empire's greatest triumph, warriors elevated to something beyond mortal, gifted with power that made them living legends. Their story did not end in glory. Through betrayal, war, and a doom of their own making, these once noble champions were broken and bound, their spirits trapped inside the very weapons they had wielded, cursed to exist as blades rather than beings. They are called the Darkin, and Aatrox is the most feared among them, a warrior of endless rage sealed inside a great sword, waiting through the long centuries for someone foolish enough to pick him up. This is the shape of the Darkin's manipulation, and it is one of the oldest and cruelest in the world. A Darkin blade lies still and silent until a living hand takes hold of it, and then it begins to speak. Not with a voice in the ear, but with something closer to a feeling in the blood. An invitation, a promise, a seduction, aimed straight at whatever the wielder most desperately wants. To the frightened it offers courage, to the weak it offers strength, to the defeated it offers victory, and it offers these things at the exact moment the person is least able to refuse them. The blade does not lie about the power. It simply neglects to mention the price. The price is everything. As the wielder draws on the Darkin's strength, the Darkin draws on the wielder in return, sinking deeper into their flesh and their mind with every swing, reshaping their body, drowning their will, until there is no longer a person holding a sword, but only the Darkin wearing a person's stolen shape. Aatrox does not conquer through open battle. He conquers through consent, tricking the desperate into inviting him in one small surrender at a time. And by the time they understand what is happening to them, there is no longer enough of them left to fight back. It is a possession that the victim begins willingly, which is precisely why it cannot be undone. What gives Aatrox's manipulation its particular horror is the despair that fuels it. He does not hunger for power the way a tyrant does, and he takes no simple pleasure in cruelty the way Thresh does. He is an immortal thing trapped in an existence he has come to loathe, and much of what he seeks is a way to feel the fury and freedom of the battlefield again, to wear a body, to move, to fight, to breathe briefly escape the endless nothing of being a weapon on the ground. His seduction of the desperate is the act of a drowning thing pulling others under, and there is something almost pitiable in it, right up until you remember how many lives he has hollowed out to buy himself a few more moments of feeling alive. He targets the desperate deliberately, because the desperate are the easiest to deceive. A content and cautious person walks past a strange and beautiful sword lying in the ruins. It is the one who has lost a battle they cannot afford to lose, the one facing an enemy they cannot beat, the one who would give anything for the strength to survive, who reaches down and closes their hand around the hilt. Aatrox does not have to find his victims. Their own desperation delivers them to him, and all he has to do is wait, and whisper, and promise, and let their fear finish the argument on his behalf. The lesson buried in the Darkin is one that runs through every manipulator in this journey, which is that the most effective lie is the one wrapped around a real gift. Aatrox genuinely grants the power he promises. The strength is not an illusion, the victory is not a trick, and that is exactly what makes the trap so perfect. Because a wholly false promise can be doubted, while a true one that hides a deadly cost feels like salvation. He gives his victims precisely what they asked for, and in taking it, they lose the only thing they never thought to protect, which is themselves. What lingers most about the Darkin's method is how completely it turns a victim's finest quality against them, because it is rarely the coward or the cruel who reach for the waiting blade. It is the one who cannot bear to lose, the protector facing an enemy too strong, the soldier who would trade anything to save what they love. And it is exactly that willingness to sacrifice everything that Aatrox counts on. He offers the strength to win the unwinnable fight, and he offers it in the precise moment when refusing would feel like surrender, so that the victim's own courage and devotion become the hooks that drag them under. A selfish person might hesitate at the price, but a selfless one, desperate to save another, will pay it without ever pausing to read what is being paid, and by the time the borrowed strength has finished its work there is no longer anyone left inside to regret the bargain. From a blade that steals the bodies of the desperate we travel further back still, to the golden age of Shurima, to a betrayal so complete that it brought down the mightiest empire the world had ever known. Worked patiently by a servant who smiled at his master's side through every year that he plotted the man's ruin. Zereth, in the golden age of ancient Shurima, when the Desert Empire stood as the greatest power the world had yet seen, there lived a slave of extraordinary gifts, a boy born into chains who possessed a mind for magic that far outstripped the free men who owned him. His name was Zereth, and through talent and relentless cunning, he raised himself from the lowest station imaginable to a place at the right hand of royalty, becoming the trusted advisor and closest companion of the young man destined to be emperor. To everyone who saw them together, theirs looked like one of the great friendships of the age, the brilliant servant and the noble prince, bound by loyalty and shared purpose. Only one of the two knew that the friendship itself was a long and patient lie. Zereth had never forgotten the chains, and he never forgave the world that had bound him in them, and beneath his every loyal act there burned a single consuming purpose: to seize a power so vast that no one could ever again call him a slave. He came to learn of ascension, the sacred rite by which a chosen few Shurimans were raised into beings of godlike might. And he understood that this was the power he had been hunting for all along. What he also understood, and what made him so dangerous, was that he would never be chosen for it, because slaves were not made into gods, and so if he wanted ascension he would have to steal it, and the theft would demand the most patient deception of his entire life. For years he played the devoted friend, while quietly arranging the pieces of his betrayal, guiding events with a subtle hand, clearing away obstacles, offering counsel that served his hidden design far more than it ever served the master who trusted him. He positioned himself so carefully and so invisibly that the emperor-to-be came to lean on him more heavily with each passing season, never once suspecting that the advisor at his shoulder was steering him gently toward a doom prepared with loving care. This is the most intimate and the most cruel manipulation of all, the betrayal that grows inside a genuine trust, and Xerath cultivated it the way a gardener tends a slow poison, attentively, unhurriedly, and with a patience that bordered on devotion. When at last the moment of ascension arrived, the moment his master was to be raised into a living god, Xerath made his move and reached to take the divine power for himself, betraying in a single stroke the one friend who had trusted him with everything. The theft did not unfold as he had planned. The corrupted rite erupted into catastrophe, and the great capital of Shurima was unmade in an instant. Its people and its splendor swallowed, its emperor struck down, and an empire that had stood as the wonder of the world collapsed in the space of a single heartbeat. Xerath did gain his power, after a fashion, transformed into a being of raw arcane energy far beyond any mortal limit. And yet the same disaster that granted it also bound him, sealing him within a shattered prison for age upon endless age. There is a bitter justice in what became of him, the same justice that quietly shadows so many of these deceivers. He spent a lifetime of patient treachery, reaching for a power that would set him free forever, and the very grasp that closed around it locked him away for thousands of years. A god in chains, which is precisely the fate he had schemed his whole life to escape. He won exactly the thing he wanted, and lost the only thing that would have made it worth the wanting. And in the end, he had no one to blame but the loyal mask he had worn so well and for so long that it cost him everything the moment he finally set it down. From an ancient betrayal born of the hunger for power, we turn to a very different kind of promise, one made not in the language of conquest, but in the language of progress, offered by a man who believes he is saving people even as he unmakes them. Victor, deep in the undercity of Zorn, among the smoke and the machinery and the desperate ingenuity of the poor, there lives an inventor of extraordinary brilliance who has arrived at a conclusion that he considers not cruel, but merciful. Victor believes that the source of all human suffering is the flesh itself, the frail and emotional and mortal body, with its pain, its fear, its grief, and its endless capacity to be hurt. He believes that this suffering can be ended, that a person can be lifted beyond it, if only they are willing to shed the weakness of the flesh and embrace the cold perfection of the machine. He calls this vision the glorious evolution, and he pursues it with the certainty of a man who has stopped doubting that he is right. He began with himself, replacing his own failing body piece by piece with augmentations of his own design, and each improvement only deepened his conviction. Freed from certain pains and certain limits, he came to see ordinary human life as a kind of sickness that most people simply do not realize they are suffering from. And he came to see his own transformation as a cure that it would be selfish to keep to himself. This is where the inventor becomes something more dangerous, because a man who believes he alone holds the cure for the human condition will eventually decide that the people who refuse his cure are the ones with the problem. His manipulation does not come dressed as manipulation at all. It comes dressed as compassion. Victor seeks out the broken and the suffering, the sick, the grieving, the ones ground down by lives of pain in the Undercity, and he offers them exactly what they have prayed for, an end to their agony, a release from their weakness, a chance to become something greater and stronger and free of the burdens they can no longer bear. To a person in genuine misery, this is not a temptation to be resisted. It is a rescue, and they reach for it with gratitude, never quite noticing that the price of ending their suffering is the surrender of the very self that was suffering. That is the quiet horror at the center of the glorious evolution, that its victims are not tricked into something they never wanted, but gently guided towards something they wanted too much to examine closely. They ask to be relieved of their pain, and Victor relieves them of it, along with their fear, their doubt, their grief, and eventually the messy, emotional, human core that made them who they were. He does not see this as theft. He sees it as liberation, the removal of a disease, and his sincerity is precisely what makes him so persuasive, because he is not pretending to believe in his cause. He believes in it completely, and belief is far more contagious than any lie. He gathers followers the way a prophet gathers a flock, not by deceiving them about his goal, but by convincing them that his goal is their salvation. He shows them a version of existence without pain, and asks them why they would cling to their suffering, and to people who have known nothing but suffering, the question answers itself. One by one they choose the evolution, and one by one the warm and flawed and frightened individuals who chose it are replaced by something calmer, colder, and no longer quite themselves, and each of them, in the moment of choosing, was certain they were being saved. What makes Victor a manipulator rather than merely a zealot is his understanding of despair as an opening. He knows that hope is a poor lever and that hurt is a strong one, and he positions himself always where the hurt is deepest, offering his cure to the people least able to weigh what it will cost them. He does not need to lie about the machinery or the loss of self, because he has learned that a person drowning in pain will not read the fine print. They will only see the outstretched hand, and they will take it, and they will thank him, and that gratitude is the most complete victory any manipulator can ever win. The victim who helps to close the trap and believes it a kindness to the very end. The most chilling feature of the glorious evolution is how reasonable it sounds from inside the suffering it targets, because Victor never asks anyone to want less than they already want. He asks only whether they would keep their pain if they did not have to, and to a person worn thin by a lifetime of it, that question carries just one possible answer. He does not argue people out of their humanity. He simply lowers the price of surrendering it until surrender begins to look like relief. And each convert makes the next one easier, because a calm and painless former sufferer standing quietly at his side is a more convincing sermon than any words could ever be. One by one the frightened and the aching choose his cure, and one by one the warm and flawed people who chose it are replaced by something steadier and colder, and not a single one of them, in the moment of choosing, believed they were giving up anything at all. Victor promises to save people from their pain by remaking their bodies, but there is another prophet in Runeterra who promises to save them by ending their world entirely, and who has convinced himself that the greatest kindness he can offer is oblivion. Malzahar, he was once an ordinary man of the southern deserts, a wanderer who had known loss and hardship, and who carried the ordinary sorrows of an ordinary life. That life ended, though he continued walking around inside it when he began to hear voices rising from the empty places of the world, voices from the void, the great devouring nothingness that presses against the edges of reality. Most who hear such voices are driven mad or consumed. Malzahar listened and understood, or believed that he did, and he emerged from the experience convinced that he had been chosen to deliver a message the whole world needed to hear. The message, as he understands it, is one of peace. Malzahar does not see the void as most people do, as a hungry horror that unmakes everything it touches. He sees it as the end of striving, the end of pain, the end of the endless cruel struggle of living, a final and perfect stillness waiting to embrace anyone brave enough to welcome it. He believes that the coming of the void is not a catastrophe to be feared, but a salvation to be hastened, and he has appointed himself its prophet, walking the world to spread the good news that everything will soon, mercifully, come to an end. This is what makes him so dangerous and so difficult to argue with. He is not lying, at least not knowingly. He is a true believer, radiant with the calm certainty of a man who has made peace with the worst thing imaginable and now wants to share that peace with everyone else. When he speaks to the lost, the grieving, the ones crushed under the weight of their own lives, he offers them something that sounds like the answer to every prayer they have stopped bothering to say. An end to suffering, a release from struggle, a place in something vast and final. To a person who has run out of reasons to keep fighting, the promise of a beautiful ending is the most seductive promise of all. His followers do not think of themselves as a doomsday cult, and that is precisely the measure of his skill. They think of themselves as the enlightened, the ones who have seen past the fear that grips everyone else, the ones brave enough to look into the darkness and find comfort there. Malzahar reframes annihilation as awakening and despair as wisdom, and he does it so gently and so sincerely that his flock comes to pity the frightened masses who still cling to their doomed little lives. He turns the survival instinct itself into a kind of ignorance to be risen above, and once a person accepts that, there is no argument left that can reach them. The horror of Malzahar is that he genuinely wants to help, and that the help he offers is the end of everything. He does not manipulate people into serving his ambition, because he has no ambition beyond the message. He manipulates them into welcoming their own destruction, and he does it out of what he sincerely feels is love. There is no cure for a manipulator like this, no bribe that tempts him, and no threat that frightens him, because he has already surrendered himself to the very thing he preaches. He asks nothing for himself and offers only the ending, and a man who wants nothing except to convince you that oblivion is mercy is a man who can never be reasoned out of his kindness. He never needs to hide his intentions the way an ordinary schemer must, and that openness is itself a part of the trap. Because a man who plainly announces that he wishes to end the world sits so far outside what people expect a deceiver to do that they struggle to believe he truly means it. His followers hear the message and mistake its calm sincerity for wisdom, its complete lack of personal ambition for purity, and they come to feel that they are the clear-eyed ones, while everyone still clinging to life is simply too frightened to look. Malzahar has taken the deepest instinct any living thing possesses, the will to keep living, and reframed it as a kind of ignorance to be risen above. And once a person accepts that framing there is nothing left that anyone can say to them. You cannot warn someone away from a doom they have decided to call salvation, and you cannot frighten a person who has already fallen in love with the ending. From a prophet who would unmake the world, we turn to a rebel who would only unmake a kingdom, a man whose gift is the taking of other people's power, and whose greatest weapon is a wound that everyone can see is real. Silas. He was born in Demacia, a proud and orderly kingdom with one great and terrible flaw at its heart, which is a deep and ancient fear of magic. In Demacia, magic is treated as a sickness and a crime, and those born with it are hunted, imprisoned, and erased. And Silas was born with a gift stranger than most, the ability to reach into another person's magic and take it for his own. As a boy, this made him useful to the very order that persecuted mages, the mage seekers who hunt magic through the kingdom, and they put his talent to work, using the mage to find other mages, teaching him to betray his own kind before he was old enough to understand what he was doing. The turning came in a moment of horror that shaped everything after it. Silas, forced to touch a magic too great and too corrupted for him to control, became the instrument of a tragedy, and the kingdom that had used his gift threw him into a lightless prison for it, condemning the tool for the harm it had been made to do. He spent long years in the dark, chained and forgotten, nursing a grievance that was not imaginary and not exaggerated, because everything that had been done to him was exactly as unjust as he understood it to be. That is the seed of his particular power over others, a wound so genuine that no one can call him a liar for showing it. When at last he broke free, aided in secret by someone who pitied him and believed in his cause, he did not simply flee. He struck back, killing the captors who had held him and declaring himself the champion of every mage the kingdom had ever wronged. And around that declaration, he began to gather a movement. His manipulation is built on truth, which is the strongest foundation any manipulation can have. He does not need to invent Demasia's cruelty, because it is real. He only needs to point at it, to give voice to the rage of the oppressed, and to position himself as the one who will finally make the powerful pay. His personal magic mirrors his method perfectly. On the battlefield, he reaches into his enemies and steals their power, turning their own strength against them, and this is exactly what he does with people and with grievances as well. He takes the real suffering of the persecuted and channels it toward his own ends, borrowing the moral force of a just cause the way he borrows a sorcerer's spell, wielding it with a skill its rightful owners rarely possess. He makes the oppressed feel seen, feel powerful, feel that their pain finally means something, and in doing so he binds them to him, because a person who believes you are the answer to their suffering will follow you almost anywhere. Here, the story splits into two readings, and honest tellers of it have never fully agreed. In one reading, Silas is a liberator, a man wronged beyond bearing, who fights for people the world has abandoned, and his manipulations are the necessary tools of the powerless against the powerful. In the other reading, he is something more troubling, a man who has learned to wear a righteous cause like armor, who feeds real grievances into a fire he intends to control, and who may care less about freeing the oppressed than about ruling the revolution their suffering makes possible. The unsettling thing is that both readings can be true at once, and that the most effective manipulator of a just cause is often the one who half believes in it himself. That ambiguity is his shield. You cannot easily condemn a man who fights against real cruelty, and you cannot easily trust a man who has made a career of turning other people's power into his own, and Silas lives in the narrow space between those two facts, drawing strength from both. He has taken the oldest trick of the demagogue, the marriage of a true injustice to a personal ambition, and he wields it with the same effortless theft he uses on the battlefield, borrowing the fury of the wronged and spending it on a future that may or may not be theirs. The genuine cruelty done to him is exactly what makes his hold on others so hard to break. Because to question, Silas can feel like siding with the kingdom that broke him, and few people have the stomach to defend a jailer against a man who was wrongly jailed. He stands always in front of a real injustice, wearing it like a shield, so that any doubt about his methods becomes tangled up with doubt about the cause itself, and most who might have challenged him fall silent rather than appear to excuse the very cruelty he suffered. That is the oldest and most dependable move in the demagogue's craft, the binding of a private hunger to a righteous wound so tightly that no one can strike at the one without seeming to strike at the other. Whether he is a liberator who happens to be dangerous or a dangerous man who happens to hold a just cause, the answer stays maddeningly out of reach. And Silas has learned to live in comfort inside that doubt, drawing his strength from the plain fact that no one can ever be quite certain what he is. We have spent a long while among manipulators who use words and causes and promises, but the oldest deceivers of all needed none of these, because they learned to hunt before language existed. wearing the shapes of the familiar to draw the living into the dark. Fiddlesticks. Before the kingdoms, before the ancient empires, before there was anything you would recognize as history, there was already fear, and something in the world learned to feed on it. Fiddlesticks is one of the oldest terrors in all of Runeterra, a primordial thing that predates memory itself. So ancient and so dreadful that the peoples who came after did not remember it as a creature, but as a warning, a shape half glimpsed at the edge of the firelight, a reason to hang effigies at the borders of a village and never quite explain why. It was feared so completely that it was bound and buried and forgotten on purpose, which is the only mercy the world could manage against a thing like this. Its hunger is not for flesh or gold or power, but for fear itself, the raw terror of a living mind. And across the long ages it has perfected a way of harvesting that terror that relies entirely on deception. Fiddlesticks does not chase its prey. It lures them. And it lures them by wearing the sounds and shapes of the things they trust. It mimics a voice calling for help, the cry of a lost child, the words of a familiar friend, and it uses these borrowed sounds to draw the curious and the compassionate away from safety and into the lonely places where it waits. The very best of human instincts, the urge to help, the urge to answer a call for aid, becomes the hook it hangs its victims on. This is a manipulation stripped down to its oldest and purest form, older than any lie ever spoken in a language. It does not persuade with arguments or seduce with promises. It simply imitates the familiar until trust does the rest, exploiting the deep animal certainty that a known voice means safety. By the time a victim realizes that the friend calling their name is not their friend at all, that the shape ahead in the dark is wearing something borrowed, they have already followed it too far to turn back. The trust they placed in a familiar sound has led them exactly where the thing wanted them, alone and afraid, and ripe for the harvest. What makes fiddlesticks so unsettling is the absence of any motive a person could bargain with. Every other manipulator in this journey wants something you might understand, power or pleasure or belief or revenge, and where there is a want, there is at least the possibility of negotiation. Fiddlesticks wants only your fear, and it wants it the way a fire wants fuel, without malice and without mercy, as a simple fact of its nature. You cannot reason with it, cannot appeal to it, cannot offer it anything it would rather have, because the terror it is drawing out of you is the only thing it has ever desired. The scarecrows and effigies that dot the quiet corners of the world are, in the oldest tellings, not decorations but wards, crude images of the thing raised in the desperate hope of keeping the real thing away. There is a grim irony in that, because it means the creature has managed to manipulate whole peoples across the ages without any of them ever seeing it clearly, spreading a nameless dread so effective that they built its likeness into their own defenses and forgot why. Even in its long imprisonment, even reduced to a half-remembered fear, it shaped the behavior of the living, which is perhaps the most complete manipulation of all, the kind that outlives the manipulator's own presence and keeps working in the dark long after everyone has agreed to stop believing in it. It hunts best in solitude, and this is no accident. Because a person alone has no one to confirm what they are hearing, no second pair of ears to say that the familiar voice out in the dark sounds somehow wrong. Fiddlesticks draws its victims away from the safety of company toward the lonely edges of the world. The empty field, the far end of the road, the quiet place beyond the last light, and it is there, where a single mind has only itself to trust, that its imitations do their deadliest work. A crowd might notice the flaw, might catch the small wrongness in a borrowed voice, but a lone traveller talks themselves past every warning, because a mind left to itself will nearly always choose the comforting explanation over the frightening one. Isolation is the true trap, and the mimicry only baits it, coaxing the living one careful step at a time away from everyone who might have told them to turn and run. We rise now away from the world entirely, up past the clouds and the peak of Mount Targon into the realm of the celestial powers, where the manipulations are older and stranger than anything that walks the ground, and where a being who looks like a laughing child holds the fate of worlds in her restless hands. Zoe, she is the aspect of Twilight, one of the great celestial powers of Targon, and she appears as a playful, giggling girl with a short attention span and a fondness for games, which is exactly the disguise a cosmic force of change would choose if it wanted mortals to underestimate it. Beneath the childish delight is something ancient and immense, a herald of transformation whose arrival means that the world is about to become something other than what it was. When Zoe appears to someone, it is because a moment of enormous change is coming for them, and she has been sent to deliver the message, though delivering it plainly would be far less fun than playing with it first. Her manipulation is woven entirely out of play, and that is what makes it so hard to see coming. She does not scheme in the manner of a Noxian courtier, or preach in the manner of a prophet. She teases, she jokes, she distracts, she turns grave matters into games and world-ending news into riddles, and she does it all with such genuine delight that her victims struggle to take her seriously, right up until the change she heralds crashes down on them. A threat you can see is easy to brace against. A threat that arrives skipping and laughing, that asks you to play before it tells you your world is ending, slips past every defense you have, because nothing in you believes that something so cheerful could be so dangerous. She embodies the chaos of transformation itself, the way a single small moment can tip an entire life or an entire world onto a new path, and she treats that awesome power as a plaything. To Zoe, the boundary between a harmless prank and a cosmic upheaval is thin to the point of vanishing, and she dances back and forth across it without concern, because from where she stands the difference hardly matters. She can twist perception, bend the odds of a moment, and turn the familiar strange, and she does these things not out of cruelty, but out of a bottomless curiosity about what will happen next, which in its own way is far more unsettling than cruelty would be. The unsettling heart of Zoe is that she is not evil and cannot be reasoned with as though she were. She holds no grudges and pursues no revenge. She simply loves change and loves games, and sees no meaningful line between the two. And a mind like that cannot be bargained with in any language a mortal understands. You cannot appeal to her mercy, because she is not being cruel. And you cannot appeal to her interests, because her only interest is the delight of the game itself. She will upend your entire existence with the same bright innocence a child brings to knocking over a tower of blocks, and she will be genuinely puzzled that you are not laughing along. That innocence is the most complete disguise any manipulator in this journey wears. LeBlanc hides behind illusions, and Vladimir hides behind charm. But Zoe hides behind actual joy, a delight so real that it disarms every suspicion, and behind it sits a power vast enough to reshape fate on a whim. She does not need to convince you to trust her, because no part of you can believe that something laughing that hard means you any harm. And by the time you understand that the game was never a game at all, the change has already arrived, and the world you knew a moment ago is simply gone. Part of what makes her impossible to guard against is that she does not conceal her power the way the others conceal theirs. She conceals it in plain sight, behind a delight so genuine that it disarms every suspicion before it can even take shape. A schemer who lurks in the shadows at least announces, by lurking, that there is something to fear, But Zoe skips into the open, laughing and playing. And nothing in a mortal mind can square that brightness with the scale of what she quietly carries. She treats the tipping of a whole world onto a new path with the same easy glee a child brings to knocking over a tower of blocks. And from where she stands, the two acts truly are the same size, which is a thought no ordinary person can hold for long without flinching away from it. By the time anyone understands that the laughing girl was the herald of their own undoing, the change she came to announce has already arrived, and the world they knew a breath ago is simply, quietly, no longer there. And yet even a power like Zoe, even the celestial forces of Targon that send her, are not beyond the reach of manipulation. Because at the very summit of this journey sits a being so ancient and so mighty that he shaped the stars themselves, and who was nonetheless bound into servitude by a single perfect lie. Aurelian's soul. He is a celestial dragon of almost incomprehensible age and power, a creature who was old when the youngest stars were born, and whose purpose across the vast dark of the cosmos was the forging of stars themselves. Picture a being who does not conquer worlds but creates them, who scatters light across the emptiness for the sheer joy of making, who once wandered the endless night as free as anything has ever been, answering to no one, bound by nothing, a maker of suns drifting wherever his curiosity carried him. That is what Aurelian's soul was, and the tragedy of his story is that he is telling it from inside a cage. The cage was not built with walls or chains, because no wall could hold him, and no chain could bind a thing that forges stars. It was built with a lie, and the lie was aimed with terrible precision at the one weakness a being of his scale possesses, which is that a creature so far above the schemes of small things does not expect to be schemed against. The celestial powers of Targon presented him with a crown, an object of beauty and apparent honor, and they framed it as a gift, a mark of respect, a fitting adornment for a being of his magnificence. He accepted it, because why would he not? Because what could such small and clever things possibly do to him? What they could do was everything. The crown was no gift but a binding, an artifact that seized upon his power and turned it to their service, compelling the greatest maker in the cosmos to forge his stars for Targon's benefit rather than for his own boundless wandering. In a single stroke, without a battle, without a struggle, he could even properly resist. The free maker of suns became a leashed servant, his infinite power redirected by beings a fraction of his age and a fraction of his strength. They did not overpower him, because they could never have overpowered him. They tricked him, and the trick held where no army ever could have. This is why he belongs at the summit of any accounting of manipulation. Because his story is the final proof of the thing all these deceivers understood in their different ways, that strength is no defense against a lie aimed at the right blind spot. Aurelian's soul could have unmade Targon and everything on it, could have scattered its mountain to dust and blown out its skies, and none of that mattered, because the manipulation never asked him to lose a fight. It only asked him to accept a gift, to lower his guard for a single moment of vanity and trust, and a single moment was all his captors needed. The mightiest being in the story was undone not by a greater force, but by a smaller mind that understood him better than he understood himself. His long imprisonment carries a bitterness that suits the grandeur of what was taken from him. He remembers freedom, remembers the joy of making stars for no reason but the making, remembers a cosmos that belonged to no one and least of all to the petty powers of a single mountain. And he is forced to labor for those powers with the memory of that freedom fresh and endless in his ancient mind. There is no torment quite like being a god who knows exactly how small the hands are that hold his leash, and who cannot break it, because the binding was never about strength, and so his strength has nothing to push against. He is proof that the most complete prison is the one you walked into willingly, believing you were being honored. The cruelest detail of his imprisonment is that it required his own cooperation, if only for a single instant, because the crown could bind only a being who consented to wear it. His captors did not seize it and force it upon him against his will. They offered it, and he lowered his great head to receive it, and in that one gesture of accepted honor, the trap quietly closed. A creature accustomed to fear and awe from everything smaller than himself had no defense at all against flattery. Because flattery does not feel like an attack, it feels like the world finally acknowledging what you have always known yourself to be. The powers of Targon understood that the way to leash a god was never to challenge his pride, but to feed it. To make the leash look exactly like a laurel, and Aurelian Sol, who could have seen through any threat ever aimed at him, simply never thought to distrust a compliment. That is where our journey ends, in the cold between the stars, with a maker of suns bound by a crown he was pleased to accept, and it is a fitting place to end. Because it draws together everything these many deceivers have shown us across the marble halls and the frozen wastes and the drowned temples and the empty dark. Look back across all of them, and a pattern rises quietly out of the differences. LeBlanc worked in illusions and Swain worked in secrets. Lysandra worked in forgotten history, and Vladimir in flattering warmth. Evelyn in desire, and Malzahar in the promise of an ending, and every one of them arrived, by their own separate road, at the same buried truth. Force is loud, and force is resisted, and force leaves its victims certain of who wronged them. Manipulation is quiet, and manipulation is welcomed, and its finest victims never learn there was a wrong at all. Because they helped to build the trap and mistook it for a gift. Notice how many of these deceivers gave their victims something real. Aatrox truly grants the strength he promises. Victor truly ends the pain he offers to take away. Elise truly elevates the few she chooses to spare. And Evelyn truly delivers an experience beyond imagining. The lie was never in the gift. The lie was in the silence around its cost. The small, unmentioned clause that turned salvation into surrender. And that is the lesson these figures teach again and again, that the most dangerous falsehood is the one wrapped snugly around a genuine truth, because a truth is the one thing a suspicious mind will not think to doubt. Notice too how each of them found the particular opening in the particular soul. Aatrox waited for the desperate, Victor sought out the suffering, Malzahar spoke to those who had run out of reasons to keep going, and Silas gave voice to the genuinely wronged. None of them tempted people with what those people claimed to want. They tempted them with what those people secretly wanted. The hidden hunger, the private wound. The ambition or the grief or the fear that the victim had been carrying alone in the dark, and that precision is what separates a common liar from a master of the craft. A liar tells you a story. A manipulator learns your story and tells it back to you, until you cannot tell where your own desires end and their design begins. There is a strange loneliness that runs beneath nearly all of them, visible once you look for it. Twisted Fate taught the whole world that his smile means a trick, and so his smile can never again be believed by anyone he might have loved. LeBlanc has hidden herself so thoroughly that not even she may remember which of the reflections is real. Aurelian Sol, mightiest of them all, sits alone in his cage forging light for masters he despises. The art that gives these figures such power over others seems to cost them the one thing power cannot buy: the ability to be truly known by another mind, and many of them stopped wanting that so long ago that they no longer feel the lack. Perhaps that is why so many of them kept deceiving long after any practical reason had fallen away. Thresh has all the souls he could ever want and torments them still. Jin performs for audiences who already fear him. Zoe plays her games with no prize in mind but the playing. Somewhere along the endless road of manipulation, the lie stopped being a means to an end and quietly became the end itself, a pleasure pursued for its own sake, a hunger that feeds on the act of feeding. They did not learn deception to get what they wanted. In time, deception became the only thing they wanted, and that may be the truest measure of a master manipulator, the one for whom the game has swallowed every other goal. What binds all of them together, in the end, is patience, the willingness to wait. Lysandra held a single lie across thousands of years. Swain spent a lifetime mapping a hidden enemy before he struck. Vladimir courted the ambitious across 100 generations, and Fiddlesticks waited out entire ages in the buried dark. Manipulation is the art of the long game, the craft of those content to move slowly, to plant a small seed of trust or fear or desire, and then wait, sometimes for centuries, for it to grow into the harvest they intended all along. Strength is impatient and hungers for the immediate blow, but the manipulator has learned to love the wait, because the wait is where the real work is done, silent and unseen, inside the mind of someone who believes they are still free. So these were the 18 who mastered the quiet art, the ones who understood that the surest way to hold another person is to leave them convinced the choice was always their own. They worked in illusions and secrets, in forgotten history and false salvation, in desire and terror and the whispered promise of exactly the thing you wanted most. And they shared, across all their differences, a single patient cruelty and a single strange gift, the gift of shaping a life from the shadows while the one being shaped mistook the strings for their own hands moving. Rest now, and let the stories settle. And, remember, the next time a promise arrives sounding too perfectly like an answer to a prayer you never spoke aloud, that the finest manipulators of Runeterra were never the ones who told the boldest lies, but the ones who simply waited and listened, and let you talk yourself into the rest.